Okay, so my country is Sierra Leone, and, well, its capital's Freetown. It's got an area of about 27,699 square miles, which is slightly smaller than the state of South Carolina, so it's a pretty small country. And its population is about 6 million, with a GDP of 8.26 billion, which is relatively small. Sierra Leone has a government which is a constitutional democracy, which is similar to ours in the United States. It has an executive, legislative, and judicial branch. In 1961, Sierra Leone gained its independence from Great Britain, and it started to have multi-party elections up until 1967, where one party kind of took control, and there weren't multi-party elections again until the mid-1990s, which kind of caused anger for those who were in power, which was one of the factors that played into the Civil War. So, yeah, that's really what I wanted to talk about today. The Civil War, which lasted from 1991 to 2002, caused over 50,000 deaths and displaced millions of Native people. And I wanted to answer the question of why the war was so devastating and violent. All right, so on March 23rd, 1991, Liberian-backed rebel forces led by Foday Senko attempted to overthrow the reigning Sierra Leonean government, which was led by President Momo. The rebel forces began to capture towns on the border between Sierra Leone and Liberia. And later on that year, after fighting kind of began, President Momo adopted, or said he was going to adopt, a multi-party system to kind of appease the rebels and kind of make them happy so violence would stop. This didn't really work, and because the president wasn't doing much to stop the rebels, Captain Valentine Strasser overthrew him in a military coup. But instead of gaining total control of the country, Strasser agreed to multi-party elections, largely in part to international pressure. So basically, fighting continued, and it was pretty brutal, through 1996, when Strasser was himself ousted in a military coup led by his defense minister, Brigadier Julius Maada. In the next elections, Ahmad Tejan Kaba was elected president, and soon after his election, he signed a peace treaty with the rebel forces in order to kind of stop the violence. But shortly after the treaty was signed, fighting broke out again. And then after that, Kaba lost control of power due to the rebel forces moving in towards the capital, Freetown, and he fled to Guinea to seek international support. When he fled, revolutionary leader John Paul Karoma took over power, and what he did was he suspended the constitution that was in place, and he took away all multi-party systems, so all other political parties were wiped out by Karoma. Then in October of 1997, the UN Security Council imposed sanctions on Sierra Leone, which kind of stopped the shipping or the supply of petroleum products as well as weapons in an attempt to kind of subdue the rebels. But against the UN's wishes, some British companies sent weapons to President Kaba and his allies in order to help them kind of defeat the rebel forces. And later on that year, with the help of Nigerian-led West African Intervention Force, the rebels were driven out of Freetown, and Kaba made it like a triumphant return to the city and to power. So fighting continued into 1999, when the rebels again tried to seize Freetown. But after several weeks of fighting and over 5,000 of their own casualties, the rebels were driven out. A few months later, a peace agreement was reached in an attempt to, once and for all, end the violence, which had been going on for 8 years now. As a part of this agreement, the rebels were granted positions in government, and they were assured that they would not be tried for war crimes for the actions that took place during the 8 years leading up to this. But unfortunately, in mid the year 2000, the peace agreement unraveled when hundreds of UN troops were abducted by rebel forces. And the rebels again tried to swoop in on Freetown, but British paratroopers were immediately sent in to evacuate all citizens and to stop the attack. And also, during that time, the paratroopers were able to capture rebel leader Fode Sunko, who died shortly after of natural causes while awaiting trial. So later in the year 2000, the remaining UN hostages were rescued, and in 2001, the Sierra Leone army began to move into rebel territory in an attempt to disarm the rebels. So in January 2002, the war was declared over and all the rebels were totally disarmed, and President Kaba came back to power and won a landslide victory. So that's basically the general idea of what happened during the war. But the reasons that the war lasted so long and so many people died were, one, because of the aid of outside forces such as Liberia and Liberian President Charles Taylor. This kind of gave the rebels it gave them a lot of support, and it gave them the military knowledge that they needed in order to try and proceed with the revolution, rather than just going about it kind of not knowing what they were doing. And another reason that the war lasted so long was because of the weakness of the government. Because power changed hands so many times during the time of the war, kind of left the government confused and not really sure of what they were doing in terms of the rebels, which allowed the rebels to gain a lot of ground and territory, and which was why the war lasted so long.